There's a truth that few people recognize. The biggest shift in a toxic relationship doesn't come with yelling, accusations, or some dramatic breakup. It comes in silence. It's that moment when you stop reacting the way you used to. When they push, you don't retreat. When they throw hurtful words, you don't argue. When they wound you, you don't cry. Not because you don't feel anything, but because you've changed. You've moved from being ruled by emotion to mastering your own response. A narcissist survives and maintains control through your emotional reactions. They study your every move, your pain, your anger, even your painful silence, and use it as a map to manipulate you. Every time you react, you unintentionally feed their power. To them, your tears confirm they still matter to you. Your anger proves they still have a grip on your mind. Even your silence, if rooted in pain, is something they know how to exploit. But then one day, you stop reacting, not out of numbness, but out of awakening. You begin asking questions, not to them, but to yourself. Why am I always the one keeping the peace? Why am I accepting things I know are wrong? Why am I afraid to lose someone who keeps hurting me? Those questions, seemingly small, are the first cracks in the foundation of their manipulation. As you begin to look at yourself with brutal honesty, you start stepping out of the role they assigned you. And that transformation doesn't need a grand gesture to be real. It's in your calm gaze. It's in how you no longer rush to explain yourself. It's in your quiet decision to walk away without announcements. That's when you start choosing inner peace over external validation. You're no longer trying to win arguments, no longer needing anyone to understand you, no longer trying to fix something that was always broken. You're not angry, not dramatic. You're just quietly closing a door you used to keep ajar out of hope. And in that exact moment, the narcissist senses something they were never prepared to face. You are no longer who you used to be. They can't read you anymore. They can't control your mood, and that leaves them disoriented. They may try to pull you back in with fake apologies or cold indifference meant to provoke, but this time you don't respond. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because they're no longer the center of your world. Real change doesn't need to be declared. It shows up in the smallest of choices, choosing not to text, not to reply, not to find an excuse to return. It doesn't come from hatred, but from clarity, knowing exactly who you're dealing with, knowing how much you've endured, and knowing you deserve more. It's the silence of someone who's grown through the storm, not full of rage, just full of awareness. When they see that, when they witness the light of someone reborn through pain, they realize you've changed for good. You're no longer prey, no longer someone who needs them to feel whole, no longer a person who can be manipulated with words or feelings. You are now fully yourself. Not perfect, but clear enough to never return to the place that once made you lose who you were. To understand why your transformation leaves the narcissist so shaken, we have to go back to the very way they built their entire emotional control system within the relationship. Because narcissists don't love the way ordinary people do, they're not looking for connection, they're looking for emotional possession. To them, a relationship isn't a space where two people grow together. It's a power game, where there is only the controller and the controlled. And you, sensitive, emotional, always trying to please, were the perfect piece for that game. From the beginning, they didn't love you. They profiled you. They read you like a silent psychologist. They watched for what scared you, when you softened, which memories brought you pain, and then built their strategy around it. They didn't approach you with genuine empathy, but with calculated insight, so they could later use those very insights to control your reactions. When you were vulnerable, they played the protector. When you questioned them, they made you feel guilty. And when you doubted them, they convinced you that you were the problem. Every expression you made, your eyes, your voice, even your breath, became data for them to adjust their behavior. This was manipulation, not through brute force, but through twisted logic and toxic persuasion. They made you believe that your most basic needs were too much, that your clear memories were distorted, and that your emotions were flaws to be fixed. They didn't need to hold your hand. They just needed to hold on to your self-doubt. And from there, they controlled the entire narrative. Here's the most frightening part. A narcissist doesn't need you to love them, they just need you to stop believing in yourself. Every compliment they give comes with strings attached. Every apology comes with a but. And every time you begin to rise, they pull you back down, not with threats, but with carefully crafted guilt. They fuse love with suffering. They make you believe that your pain is proof of your loyalty, and in time you start to accept that hurt is just the cost of being loved. But on a deeper level, their drive isn't just about control, it's about emotional survival. They need you to feel valuable. When you're hurting because of them, they feel important. When you chase after them, they feel lovable. The more intense your emotional reactions, the more real they feel. Because deep down, the narcissist has no solid sense of self. They are hollow souls, borrowing emotion from others just to feel alive. And that's why your calmness destroys them faster than any revenge ever could. When you start emotionally disconnecting, when you stop crying, stop raging, stop seeking validation, they spiral into inner panic, not because you left, but because they are no longer reflected through you. They're no longer the center of someone's universe, and to them that's a blow to the very core of their existence. So when you change, it's not just your actions, it's an entire power structure collapsing. You've stepped out of the role they wrote for you. You're no longer emotionally dependent, no longer apologizing for how you feel. You've broken free from a system designed to make you doubt yourself and bow your head. And that, not loud or dramatic, is a true rebellion. There is a kind of victory that doesn't need to be announced, a transformation that doesn't demand noise. It happens quietly, in that exact moment when you stop reacting. To outsiders, it might seem trivial. You don't reply to their texts, you don't defend yourself against slander, you smile instead of getting angry. But to the narcissist, it's the collapse of an entire control system they once believed was unshakable. Imagine the narcissist's mind as a machine fueled by emotional energy. Every time you cry, get angry, beg, or even try to explain, they're being refueled. Your reactions aren't just emotions to them, they're a lifeline. And so, when you stop reacting, it's like you've unplugged the machine. They're left not just confused, but powerless. They no longer know which button to push to make you function the way you used to. At that moment, a quiet reversal of power takes place. Once they led the narrative, you followed. They manipulated situations, you adjusted your emotions. But now, you are no longer caught in their story. You're the observer. You're no longer spinning in their storm of manipulation. You've stepped out, planted your feet, and walked away from the role they wrote for you. Your silence is not surrender. It's a declaration of inner strength. It's the highest form of self-possession. You choose not to react, not because you're weak, but because you no longer see a need to prove anything. You're not avoiding, you understand. You're not retaliating, you've transcended. And that confuses the narcissist in a way they've never encountered. Not because you're overly dramatic, but because you're deeply calm. Psychology calls this the shift from a reactive state to a proactive state. Before, you lived in reaction, your emotions tethered to their behavior. When they went silent, you panicked. When they praised you, you lit up. When they criticized, you withdrew. But now you've reclaimed the right to your own emotional responses. You've cut the cords. You're no longer operating on their cues, and that lack of control unravels them more than any breakup ever could. A narcissist doesn't understand emotional detachment. In their world, every relationship is a power exchange. Someone wins, someone loses. They don't love through presence. They love through the ability to hurt. So when you stop playing that game, they feel abandoned. Not out of love, but because they've lost the mirror that once reflected their distorted ego. You no longer respond with rage to their rage, or with dependence to your pain. You respond with stillness, and that stillness is unbearable to them. This is why, during this stage, narcissists often react with extreme measures. They might demand to talk, send long messages, explode in anger, or suddenly play the victim. But now you see it clearly, the familiar pattern, and instead of being pulled back in, you recognize it and stand your ground. You've learned how to hold space for yourself, and no one enters that space unless you allow them. Non-reaction, when born from awareness, is a form of unwavering strength. It needs no explanation, no defense, no shouting. It only needs a look, a silence, a steady walk away without turning back. And in that moment, the narcissist realizes they no longer have a place in your world, not because you slammed the door, but because you walked out of the room they once controlled. There is a sacred moment in the healing journey, not flashy, not dramatic, but powerful enough to shake the very foundation of manipulation. It's the moment you begin to believe you have worth. Not the worth others assign to you, not validation reflected in someone else's eyes, but inherent worth. Independent, whole, and unchanging. Even in silence, loneliness, or rejection, a narcissist doesn't just manipulate your behavior, they infiltrate your sense of value. They don't need to scream, "You're worthless." They just plant seeds of doubt with soft but cutting phrases. "You're overreacting. Why are you upset over something so small? No one else would accept you like I do." And over time, they don't even have to say it anymore. You start repeating it to yourself, like an echo bouncing around in your own mind. This is one of the most insidious forms of manipulation, making you become the enforcer of their standards, making you regulate your emotions to fit their mold. They don't need chains. You put them on yourself. They don't need a cage. You're afraid to step outside the safety zone they created for you. But then something miraculous happens. You begin to question your own self-doubt. You start asking, why do I think I'm asking for too much, when all I really want is respect? You look back and realize that the emotions you were trained to see as too much were really survival instincts of a soul that had been hurt for far too long. And only when you start to ask those questions do you begin to see the truth that's been distorted all along. That's when your real sense of self begins to rebuild, not in the form of, I must be stronger to fight them, but rather, I don't need to fight. I just need to stand firm in my own worth. This self-respect doesn't come from an inflated ego. It comes from a deep knowing, I am not perfect, but I am worthy of love, of being heard, of being respected. And that transformation terrifies the narcissist. Because before they could throw you off with a single scowl or a subtle critique, now their words no longer hold weight. You've stopped searching for meaning in them. They praise you, you smile, but you don't depend on it. They criticize you, you receive it or let it pass without needing to defend yourself. They love you, great. They leave, you're still you. Narcissists live in a reversed value system. They only feel valuable when they make others feel worthless. They feel important by making you feel small. They shine by dimming others. But when you stop bowing, when you begin to walk with the posture of someone who knows exactly who they are, they lose their mirror. And that is when their control system crumbles, not because you fought it, but because you no longer needed it to survive. No one teaches you how to believe in your worth after being broken. But when that belief is forged from pain and recovery, it becomes one of the most unshakable forms of strength. It doesn't come from self-flattery, but from the courage to face yourself with all the parts you were once told to hide. And once you do that, you're no longer a pawn in someone else's emotional game. You're the player. You're the one rewriting the rules. Boundaries are not a rejection of others. Boundaries are an affirmation of yourself. In a world where narcissists manipulate by blurring your sense of identity, boundaries are the first line of light drawn through the darkness. The moment you say, I am here, and this is where I end, you are not allowed to cross. For the narcissist, ambiguity is fertile ground. They need you uncertain. They thrive in the gray zone, where things are forgivable, understandable, just this one, maybe next time. They cannot operate in clarity because clarity is light and they manipulate best in the shadows. That's why every time you try to say no, they twist it into maybe. Every time you try to walk away, they lure you into invisible negotiations. But when you start setting real boundaries, not from anger but from awareness, you no longer feel the need to explain. You don't need them to understand or agree. You stop saying, "I'm doing this because you hurt me." Instead, you say, "I'm doing this because I've had enough." And that is a statement no one can argue with, because it no longer rests on their behavior, it stands firmly on your self-worth. Boundaries aren't fences built out of rage. They're the result of growth. When you set a boundary, you're not trying to control others, you're simply managing the space you're responsible for. And within that space, you declare what is no longer negotiable: respect, safety, honesty. There is no excuse good enough for someone to repeatedly violate those things without consequence. The narcissist senses this more clearly than anyone. They're not afraid of your anger. They've triggered it 100 times. They're not afraid of your tears. They've seen more of them than you have. What terrifies them is when you set a boundary and hold it without needing their understanding, approval, or agreement. They feel the shift in your energy. You no longer react, you respond. And to them, that is unthinkable, because for the narcissist, a boundary isn't just a limit. It's a rejection of the divine role they've assigned themselves in your world. They're no longer the one who decides when you feel joy, when you feel pain, when you say enough, and when you come crawling back. Your boundary is a declaration that they are no longer in control, and that leaves them disoriented. They may lash out with rage, fake apologies, promises to change, or calculated silence to see if you'll crack, but you don't crack anymore. The point isn't "I will shut you out forever." It's "I'm no longer participating in this emotional system." You no longer live in the world they built, where every boundary was negotiable, where every no could be flipped if they found your weak spot. Now your boundary doesn't need long explanations. It is the living proof of your deep understanding that you have the right to be protected. This is when the power begins to shift, not because you hurt them, but because you no longer give them the power to hurt you. And that is what a narcissist is never prepared to face, because their entire strategy is built on the assumption that you'll always bend, that your fear of abandonment will always win, that you need them to feel whole. But now, with a calm and unshakable boundary, you're saying, "I choose myself." And in the world of someone who survives by making others question their worth, that is a silent revolution. One of the greatest spiritual turning points in the journey of breaking free from a narcissist's manipulation isn't when you scream, "I've had enough." It's when you calmly say no and stop explaining. Because in the narcissist's world, your explanations are never treated as sincere attempts to connect. They are always seen as weapons, sharpened through distortion and filtered by their bias. You once believed that if you just explained better, more kindly, more thoroughly, they would understand. That if you were honest, gentle, and logical, they might finally see the pain you were carrying. But the truth is, they did see, and they didn't care. Because what they truly want isn't to understand you. It's to keep you in a constant state of trying to be understood. They need you endlessly explaining, defending, fixing, not to move closer, but to pull you further away from yourself. Every time you try to explain your boundaries, clarify your hurt, or justify your silence, you're playing by their rules. They don't listen to connect. They listen to find a crack. Every word you offer is something to twist, distort, and use as ammunition. You say, "I feel hurt." They respond, "You're too sensitive." You say, "I need space." They ask, "Why are you punishing me?" No matter what you say, they reshape it into a story where you are always the overreactor, the selfish one, the unreasonable one. And that's why, when you stop explaining, you stop feeding the game. You withdraw from the endless loop of having to justify your emotions, and it throws them off in a way they're not prepared for. They're used to you reacting, debating, clarifying, because it keeps you in their orbit. But calm silence, steady conviction without explanation leaves them with nothing to grab onto, and they panic, not because they don't understand, but because they've lost control. The truth is, you owe no one a detailed emotional report to legitimize your right to peace. You don't need to prove why you deserve respect. Your silence is not an act of war. It's the action of someone who's stopped playing the game of needing to be accepted. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. You return to your own reality. No longer living inside someone else's universe, where you were just a supporting character in a script they wrote. No more performing to be allowed to stay. No more needing anyone to confirm whether you're right or wrong. Just you and the clarity in your heart that says, I know who I am. I know what is enough. From a psychological perspective, this is the beginning of individuation, a term coined by Carl Jung to describe the process of separating from external expectations and returning to your authentic self. You no longer live to reflect someone else's emotional needs. You live to become the most complete version of yourself. And when that happens, every manipulative game loses its power. The narcissist will try to pull you back in, with a message that seems harmless, with a sudden apology, with an emotional performance they know once made you melt, but you don't melt anymore, because you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And you know, your silence, when it comes from awakening, is the highest form of liberation. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and start living as if their presence no longer defines your emotional state, a terrifying shift occurs in the narcissist's internal world. What they experience isn't just loss, it's full-blown panic. Not because they lost you, but because they lost their ability to see themselves through you. A narcissist never truly cares about who you are, they care only about the role you play in their story. The admirer, the appeaser, the forgiver, the one who's easily emotionally swayed. When you abandon that role, they can no longer recognize themselves, because at their core, their identity has no stable form. It only exists when mirrored by someone else. And you were once that perfect mirror. So when you withdraw from that emotional dynamic, not with dramatic finality, but with calm awareness, they don't know what to do. All the tools they once used to keep you tethered no longer work. The mix of affection and blame, the half-hearted apologies, the strategic outbursts, the emotional blackmail disguised as desperation. You've seen it all, understood it all, and you no longer respond emotionally. And when they sense that loss of power, their internal panic isn't just emotional, it's an identity collapse. They begin to unravel, because losing you means losing the very source they depended on to affirm their existence. They don't know how to navigate a person who no longer dances to their tune, no longer depends on them, no longer fears losing them. Their first instinct is to escalate. They may lash out in anger, accusing you of being cold, ungrateful, or lacking compassion. They may play the victim, telling others that you've changed, painting you as the cruel one who abandoned someone who loved you with all their heart. They may suddenly become sweeter than ever, testing to see if you're still as vulnerable as before. But no matter the tactic, the goal remains the same, to pull you back into the emotional orbit where they are the center. And this is when your resolve matters most, because they're not fighting to keep you, they're fighting to keep the power you once gave them. They're not grieving the loss of your presence, they're panicking over the loss of control. Your stillness becomes the loudest signal that the cycle of emotional dependence has ended. You don't need to scream, "I'm done." Your silence says it all. From a psychological perspective, this marks a shift in the power structure of the relationship. Once you reacted, they controlled. Now you are calm, and they are lost. And what terrifies them isn't your departure, it's the realization that they are no longer important enough for you to fight for. When you live your life without concern for what they think, feel, or say, you've pushed them beyond the edges of emotional influence. And for a narcissist, that is the most painful form of rejection, because they don't know what to do with someone who no longer needs them to feel whole. You used to orbit around them as if they were the center of gravity, but now you orbit around yourself. Not out of selfishness, but because you've realized that your life should never be defined by another person. And in that reversal, they finally understand. They didn't lose you because you left, they lost you because you came back to yourself. Breaking free from a narcissist isn't just about leaving a relationship. It's about escaping a deeply embedded script, one where you unknowingly played a supporting role in a drama they wrote. And the painful truth is, you played the role too well. You were the one who always said sorry to keep the peace, the one who adjusted your emotions so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable, the one who sacrificed your boundaries for a few moments of temporary calm. But then, one day, you wake up, not because someone calls your name, but because you no longer recognize yourself in that role. You begin to look at all the things you've overlooked, ignored, excused, and you see it clearly. This is no longer your life, it's their stage, a stage where you were only loved when serving their emotional needs, where you were only allowed to stay if you were willing to slowly erase your own identity. That awakening hits like an internal earthquake. You realize that every story you've told yourself about them, they used to be good, they're just hurting, I have to stay to help them change, was part of an emotional script they planted in you. And the more you believed those lines, the further you drifted from your true self. But when you finally pick up the pen and start rewriting the script, not in their voice but in your own, a miracle begins to unfold. You no longer act from a place of emotional triggering, but from awareness. You stop trying to prove your worth and start living as though you were already enough. And most importantly, you no longer need them to acknowledge or understand your healing. Because your healing doesn't require validation from the person who broke you. It only needs one thing: your choice, made daily. The narcissist builds their power on the belief that you need them to feel valuable. But when you reclaim that worth from within, when you no longer use their gaze to define your reflection, they lose their footing, and they know it. They may test you with sudden praise, fabricated nostalgia, or by pretending they're the wounded one. But now you recognize the pattern. You're no longer there to react, you're here to create. This is the shift from reaction to intention, from merely existing beside someone else to fully living within yourself, from asking, "What must I do to be loved?" to declaring, "I deserve love, even if I no longer stay." That kind of freedom doesn't come from changing them, it comes from no longer needing them to change in order for you to be happy. At a deeper level, this is the reclaiming of emotional sovereignty. You are no longer manipulated by their silence, no longer driven by the fear of abandonment. You no longer feel the need to play the role of the understanding one, the self-sacrificing one, the patient one who stays for love. You only need one role now, the lead role in your own life. And the astonishing part is this: you don't have to fight them to achieve this. You simply stop participating in the play. When you no longer read from their script, no longer respond to their lines, no longer show up in the scenes they've choreographed, the performance falls apart. Not because you won, but because you left the theater. There's a bitter truth that almost everyone who has been entangled with a narcissist eventually has to face. You're not just letting go of a person. You're letting go of a future you once believed was real. And the most painful part isn't losing them, it's losing hope. You once hoped that love would be enough to change them, that if you were more patient, more gentle, more self-sacrificing, they would finally see it, wake up, and return to the person they were at the beginning. You clung to those early sweet moments as proof that they could be good, that beneath the pain they caused, they were still someone trying. But over time, that hope stopped being a source of strength. It became a chain. You started trading your present peace for a future that never arrived. Every time they hurt you, you told yourself, next time will be different. Every time they manipulated you, you blamed yourself. Maybe I'm just not understanding enough. And in the process, you slowly dissolved into your own dream. So when you finally wake up, when you begin stepping away from the role you were playing, when you stop trying to change them, you don't feel relief right away. What you feel first is grief. Not because they were good, but because you gave your whole heart to a fantasy. You loved a version of them that only existed in your imagination. And now you have to face the truth. That person was never real. That's when you enter the stage of deepest sorrow, but also the stage of greatest liberation. Because when you dare to let go of illusion, you reclaim reality. You stop waiting for an apology. You stop hoping for that final honest conversation. You stop believing that if you withdraw the right way, they will realize. You no longer need them to wake up. You just need yourself to. The grief of letting go of hope is not a failure. It's the funeral of illusions that once kept you blind. And, like all funerals, you have the right to mourn, to cry, to feel hollow. But you also have the right to rise, to wipe your tears and to begin again, for the first time, in truth and in your own worth. From a psychological perspective, this is the stage of breaking the unconscious agreement, the moment you stop silently consenting to the belief that love must come with one-sided sacrifice. You no longer assume that carrying someone else's dysfunction is part of mature love. You stop waiting for a miracle because you've become the miracle for yourself. And when you make it through that grief, what lies ahead is not darkness, but clarity, not the dim light of false hope, but the bright light of knowing, I can hurt, but I am no longer blind. I can miss what was, but I will not go back. I can be alone, but I will no longer trade myself just to avoid loneliness. This is not the end, it is your rebirth. When you reach the end of this journey, you may not be the same person you once were, but that isn't loss, it's evolution. You no longer live to be loved, you live as if you've always been worthy of love, even before anyone arrived. You no longer try to fix others, you've learned to protect yourself, and above all, you no longer play the role of the victim. You become the living proof that something shattered can still rise again. Maybe you once believed this journey would end with victory in the relationship, that one day they'd regret everything, realize the truth, and come back to make it right. But now you know, the real victory isn't that they change, it's that you no longer need them to. You don't need them to do what's right, because you chose what was right for you. You don't need closure from them, because you closed the chapter yourself, with courage and self-respect. This isn't a loud victory, it's a quiet one. There's no applause, no audience, just you, standing in front of the mirror, seeing yourself, and for the first time in a long while, not feeling ashamed for loving too deeply, believing for too long, or enduring too much. Instead, you see growth. You see calm eyes. You see someone who can no longer be controlled, because they've reclaimed the reins of their own life. From now on, you'll walk into new relationships with the light of awareness. You'll no longer rush to give someone a chance just because they know how to press on your wounds. You'll listen to your emotions more, set firmer boundaries, and love not through sacrifice, but through responsibility to yourself. And if there are moments when you feel weak, when memories resurface, when your heart still aches, remember this: healing isn't about erasing the wound, it's about learning to live with it without letting it run your life. You don't need to forget the past, you just need to stop letting it lead your future. You've walked through fire and you survived, but more than survived, you've become the light. If you're still here, if you've listened all the way to the very end, then I believe you've already begun your new journey. A journey that no one can walk for you. Leave a comment below to mark the moment you chose yourself. Just one line: I have seen, I have understood, and I am stepping out. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because we still have much more to talk about rebirth, about self-worth, and about the light that only appears after the darkest nights. I'll see you in the next video, and remember this: peace doesn't need to be granted. Peace begins when you choose yourself.